Oh, yeah, can I be heard?
Yes.
POIs by just turning on your camera or vocal POI. I guess I'm not looking at the chat. These types of separation oftentimes selectively works in favor of the people in position of power, which is likely to be men, which is likely to be any other kind of groups, or it just holistically harm the other types of the movement, which have more higher chances of substantially benefiting the people regardless of their gender, improving their environment as a whole. So we basically don't want these types of movement because in general harms many aspects. There's several setups then substantive. I have to clarify three things. Firstly, obviously this is about the whether we want the rise of these types of movement or not. So for extreme end, obviously on our side, this concept as a movement still exists. So some people want to advocate for these types of ideology, they can do that as well. So opposition burden is to prove why the increased presence and large attention to this movement is harmful in nature. But secondly, this is not only about the feminism and the feminist separatism motion. This is motion literally said this is about the gender separatism in general, and the movement advocates for both men and women separatism exists on their side, on either side of the house. So OG's cases about the caring about the feminists that they are stereotypically assigned to the choice feminism, all of these stuff is simply just too much limiting the scope to this motion of into the feminism aspect. But lastly, a little bit about comparative. I think we just support the absence of this rise, or if you prefer, we can defend the inclusion narrative like choice feminism, but just absent of this rises and notion of the separatism as a movement, as a strategic choices of movement to advocate. The first thing that I want to note here as an argument is about this movement will fail. This will substantially this failure is substantially harms the other movement. The thesis of this is the separation is very difficult to achieve to begin with, and rather it will make the particular group of people as minority in some structure. Firstly, not everyone can follow what this movement is saying, obviously, or not everyone feel comfortable for making their decisions based on the gender separation. Because in the general sense of choices, the self-actualization, everyone just build their own identity, build their own revealed preferences to be, just not abstain from what the general society tells about the, traditional gender role, but they create their own preferences to be, pursue your own goal and dream, just does not necessarily mean that when this movement rises, there will be the perfect separation and utopia for particular gender and safe spaces. Someone must be left and someone must not be cannot be follow this sort of thing. But secondly, how realistically this separation look like as an advocacy is that they separate based on the pre-existing male and female dominant structure, because as a movement you cannot just claim for male dominant structure and change into our female dominant structure just intuitive and realistic sense. So as a strategical and capacity of this as a movement, you cannot drastically change the dynamics of the sort of how people perceive something as a male or female dominant structure. Impact is quite simple. The rise of this unsuccessful movement just derive the resources and attention of the individual, which otherwise would have gone to the more meaningful version of the movement, which can substantially benefit the people that opening government tries to protect, like people within the corporate, people don't have an access to the safe spaces. By promoting the choice feminism, the more narrative of the inclusion, the creating a safe space within the male dominant structure, for example, creating the male presents in the female dominant structure gives you a substantial benefit, because otherwise these people cannot have an opt-out, cannot follow what movement is saying. But more importantly, second on substantive, even if it succeeds, like Oji said, why it is still bad. The thesis of this argument is about the separation reinforces the male toxicity and disproportionately empower the male dominant structure, and this is overall net harmful for the society. First reason here is that it legitimizes the male dominant structure of not accommodating the women's necessity and requirement. If it is successful, like they said, men also actively buy into this movement of the separation, because they will happy to do that in general, because they, the feminist movement or any types of the movement associated with the gender and workplaces in any social interaction was the one to take the hit, strike the balances of the male dominant structure to exclude any other types of the diverse groups of the people to begin with. But secondly, men are uniquely and structurally likely to actively create the toxic separation against women, because masculinity is the concept defined through the absence of the dependency to the others. Grown men don't, the narrative like the grown men don't depend on their mother and their family, all of these stuff. They actually, likely to take the more distance from the woman and actually buy into the norm of the separation more stronger than what women are likely to do. Lastly, this will rather toxify in creating the male exclusive culture, especially in workplaces, in this sort of thing. The specific types of things like household culture, all of these, the norm, the working style and the culture and the ethics related to what men can do, related to the perception of what men are good at, selectively pick and choose on these sort of thing. Impact is quite simple, because women are still there, because like separation isn't going to be perfect. Like, there is some number of women definitely exposed to these types of structure to begin with. Before that, I take Yuka.
Okay. All of these like incest things already occur either way. Why does it get worse with gender separatism?
Because on your side, it will rises. The motion says it rises, which means that this version of movement drive more attention and more presence in the society, and the resources and attention that the critical masses that they otherwise could have gone to the other version of movement that we support on the comparative is significantly bigger delta in this debate. The comparative is simply better, because regarding the presence and existence of the groups of the people who anyway have to be necessarily left in the particular structure, we simply better to push create the safe spaces, create the accommodation within both types of structure by pushing larger degree of inclusion, larger degree of the accommodation and acceptance of diverse groups of people on our side of the house. The movement as a resource should work like that. Otherwise, this will disproportionately empower the men, which create the harm to the most vulnerable groups of the people in the society. For all of that, beg you to oppose.
Thank you, all, for wonderful speech.
Hello. Let me just set up my amazing dead cat, and then I will.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hello, am I audible?
Sorry. Yeah, you're
Hello?
audible. Mm-hmm. Can you hear me?
Sorry. We disconnected the sound for a second. Okay.
Okay.
Am I audible?
You're audible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is this recording? Okay. First, I'd like to make a few shout outs. Firstly, to my amazing teammate Hezong, who is with me right now in a public cafe facing massive stigma and what we call dunchi, side eye, like very aggressive, judgmental side eyes from the public because we're debating in a public cafe in English. It's very embarrassing. But also a shout out to YU, to the Kita community as well as the larger NEA circuit. Very proud of where we are right now. I'd also like to make a little shout out to my microphone, to my dead cats. I've also faced a lot of shame and criticism for bringing such a mic to this tournament, but I think it just shows and it symbolizes my dedication to debate and high fidelity sound. Yes, so yes, okay. All right. All right. The case from opposition bench is quite simple. They are afraid of the formation of echo chambers. The CG response to this is quite simple and seemingly convoluted when you first hear it, so bear with me. These gender echo chambers, both male and female echo chambers, are justified, and they are a healthier form of discourse and lifestyle for certain people. The case coming from opposition push is that we need to coalesce and we need to collaborate with each other for kumbaya and harmony and for legislative pushes. One, the precondition for this ideal is to assume that the interactions and discourse between the genders is inherently productive and healthy in the first place. We tell you that oftentimes the direct discourse between the male and female social movements is confrontational in nature, whereby it just becomes a battle of comparative resentments, weighing one resentment with the other, which is just a vicious cycle with no end. And especially because there's seemingly no diplomatic solution, we think it's very, very justified for certain people to feel very uncomfortable of this, especially because there's seemingly no end or no end net solution to this specific discourse cycle of discourse. Two, OO assumes very assertively that this sort of separatist movements are one. This assumes that separatist movements are that these separate movements are going to cause resource strains. One, this assumes that most males and females are somehow existing members of the political movement and there will be a brain drain. But most people are just simply not political. But two, but specifically, they assume that they had these females and males not subscribed to the separatist movements, they would have been active members. This is a very speculative opportunity cost. We don't really know just how much delta there is or how much harm there is actually to the specific movement, to the specific separate movements that would have caused to the general feminist movements, for example, especially because these are minorities within minorities still, and especially because the feminist movement agendas are predominantly preconditioned on active interaction with each other, and there are certain people who don't want to subscribe to this interaction. Three, specifically on the point pushed by the opposition that there's going to be backlash from these echo chambers. Actually, if you think about it, and this is our backlash and direct confrontation, backlash and direct confrontation actually happens more in propensity when these genders are actively interacting with each other. Because note that the mechanistic behavior of these gender collective is inherently about moving away from interactions with the other gender. Oftentimes, thus the behavioral output coming from these gender separate movements is to create their own specific discussion forums, to create their own small niche social circles, to go on to fields that are female dominated or male dominated. Now, most of the conversations and philosophical peddling, the communication and feedback loops that they have specifically for these separatist movements, they're mostly isolated to these specific genders they want to target. Yes, there are confrontational individuals within the movement, like there are in any movement, that perhaps criticize the other gender, but that will still happen irregardless of the rise of this specific gender separatist movement. But two, note that we do agree with OO that there's a rise of incel movements. The problem with the OO is that they're equating incel chat rooms as gender separatist movements. And I want to be very careful about the mechanistic leap of the opposition, because their claim is that any and all male separatism is an incel chat room, one that assumes that most men who are gender separatists are incels and are subscribing to these separatist movements to activate an ability to try and criticize the other gender, when mechanistically and definitionally that's actually the opposite. But two, oftentimes men feel just more comfortable around men because they feel unconfident about their looks. They're socially awkward. Most people are just not even inherently political. They're apolitical. They're not active members of political movements, right? That's simply thirdly, it's just simply not fair. Not only fair, but crucially, it's not a fair characterization of the majority of the members who subscribe to these separatist movements. Because all they say is that echo chambers create division and they're a path for radicalism. Most chat rooms are not converted to harm the other gender. And this is especially true because we immediately assume in debate land that echo chambers immediately means converting to fomenting conspiracy, and that oftentimes the specific discourse and feedback loops that happens in these chat rooms and these echo chambers are actually negative. And what usually happens in these chat rooms is they just simply just talk about their niche hobbies and their specific talk. It's not like they 24/7 in most of these gender separatist chat rooms. It's not like 24/7 that a lot of people just constantly criticize the other gender, because just most people just are not like that. There's just far more things to just talk about and interact with and enjoy in life, right? And it's technically on the specific point about how there's going to be a loss of political capital, and how it comes at the cost of critical protective legislation that's only possible, assumingly, in the opposition world. This assumes that the men and the women who subscribe to these specific separatist movements are people with lots of capital. Many of the time, the people who actually subscribe to these separatist movements subscribe because they don't have capital. They don't actually subscribe or are benefited by these heteronormative standards of beauty, for example. These are people who lack capital to actually entice the other gender. That is why they subscribe to these specific loops. And they talk about how, for example, that they will only create like for men and only men structures and then career networks, for example. I don't know if this exists in the 21st century. There's obviously intense social stigma against things like male-only fraternities, male-only career fairs, male-only network events. These just don't exist because most people just know it invites massive backlash. So there's just already a natural check and balance. And I think this is where CG tries to differentiate itself from OG, because it's especially hinted at by the info side when it mentions the concept of male separatism. The reason why this is important because the rise of female separatist movement is often correlated to the rise of the male separatist movement and vice versa. Here I want to bring an analysis on both gender separatist movements. Why is the female gender separatist movement justified? We already talked about a lot of people just simply don't subscribe and don't want to associate with the other gender, right? But even male separatist movements are themselves justified and are, bear with me, understandable. There are specifically male individuals. There's specifically male individuals who are also victims of societal standards. This compares with the OG because they only really focused on male separatism. We've taken a harder burden by also justifying why even these male echo chambers are justified in of itself as well. Primarily because we tell you that these toxic societal standards exist for both genders that lack out certain individuals. For example, normative beauty standards are formed by both the female and the male gaze. Sure.
All right, so we analyzed that extremism and negative stereotypes and polarization is likely because of the inherent nature of separatist rhetoric. Where's your analysis to prove that this rhetoric is going to be healthy?
What's the end line of market? What's the end line of demarcation here? Are you assuming that all, for example, males that don't feel confident in like getting a girlfriend, that when they create these chat rooms and when they create these friend groups, that most of them are just incels that want to activate some sort of ability to actually harm the other gender? I don't think that's most cases, and that's not most cases. For example, there are people, for example, who don't follow normative beauty standards that are formed by both the male and female gaze. Some people are just not born with heteronormative beauty standards. These inherent societal standards block out certain males and females from interacting with each other. For example, there are certain men, because they are not born into generational wealth, that then live paycheck to paycheck, then they only have access to low-income jobs, so they're unable to actually. So why is it likely to succeed? And I think this is where OG lacks characterization to explain how the movement manifests in daily behaviors. It's at the most basic level, the most versions of manifestation of the movement are incredibly inaccessible, because you just need to, for example, not marry. You just need to subscribe to this movement through other methods, like simply choosing not to have a baby, just choosing to create small friend groups of that specific gender, playing Discord voice chat rooms that just create like these friend groups. This is incredibly highly accessible for these specific movements to succeed, because it just simply locks out certain people, because it allows them to convert the solace they would normally have not felt for being able to subscribe into normative standards. Be with people with similar looks, be with people with similar strange hobbies, and that gives them solace in a safe space that they would usually not would have had. We're proud to propose.
Okay, thank you, MG, for the wonderful remark. And next, I will call up on the member of opposition. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1, 0. Firstly, I'm going to explain why we attain the essential support from male to women uniquely within our side. Secondly, I'm going to explain, even in the best case of government side, the separatism succeeds to attain some sort of achievement, why separatist movement is likely to degrade the value made is based on separatism. So firstly, why we attain the essential support within our side. We are going to be the first team to actually characterize why meaningful change is possible uniquely when we remove the rise of separatism, and we are going to prove the actual impact the opening opposition wanted to achieve. So firstly, under government side, it is going to be, we are in terms of separatism, the likely example is things like single gender school, things like woman-only company, things like male-only institution, and that's the sort of things that we imagine within this state. Firstly, under government side, it will be male versus woman institution, male versus woman company, to gather state funding, to gather market incentive, credit as academic achievement. Therefore, they are likely to criticize each other because there's going to be self-interest to maintain your own institution. There's likely to be direct trade-off with women-only tech company, schools, under the zero-sum game of state budget or market funding, which relatively means that they need to demonize and discredit the act. They are likely to violate the patents that they are unlikely to collaborate and cooperation, which means that the likelihood of success within their side of the house is questionable. But under our side of the house, unity and cooperation is likely to be possible, partly because male self-interest becomes common interest, like having more diverse labor force under the lack of labor, more talented individual when you have both men and women and more population mass, especially given that women who climb up the ladder under male society is individuals who are able to overcome different discrimination barriers within education and employment, which means that this woman is likely to be meaningfully, especially talented, which is an important labor force for both gender company. It is likely, women are likely to bring fresh ideas based on the perspective of minority. This kind of self-interest is likely to be common interest for the first time when you are in the same institution and pursue the profit and interest of that group. Secondly, male also wants to push for equalization. Male are also suffering from gender role as closing government conceded. Firstly, because they are regarded more responsibility, leadership. They are required to make money and be the base of family. They are required to be independent and not be dependent despite the mental health problems that male are going through. That's why the suicide rate is high. That's why many individuals on the ground, male are also suffering, which means that male want things like equality. They want things like double income family. Male want women to be able to prosper within society and equalize the situation. Secondly, because these males have different character and specialty, there are obviously individuals who are suffering through male gender role, and especially these self-repressive individuals is likely to be the ones that is silenced on the government side. Why these unique male bloc and allies that we need to achieve is likely to be lost under the government side under the rise of separatism. We think the gender separate masculine trait is likely to be reinforced because when you say we want female separatism, male separatism is likely to justify itself by saying, oh, woman is having this single gender school, why can we not have it? Which means that it reinforces the narrative and justifies the existence of male separation. But secondly, the people who created the lies, the people who speaked up within social media or politics is likely to be one with privilege, who survivorship biases, that those who benefit from the current structure with strong mentality, strong masculine trait, which means that people who speak up is the people with strong mentality and privilege right now, and the people who are not able to speak up is the people who have people who are more kind, or people who cannot speak up under their side of the house. Secondly, separatist is on the rise, which means that it is like secondly, there's likely to be collective action problem. You are not able to speak up, even if you follow the value of equality, because you're seen as inferior under the masculinity trait. You are likely to receive backlash from the people around you. You are likely to fear that you are likely to fear, and especially given that those who do not fit the gender role is those with weaker mentality or weaker masculinity trait. They are unable to speak up on the government side of the house when masculinity is on the rise. So even if there's many people and more number of individuals who want to support equality and who want to support the more diversification of gender role, they are not able to speak up because they have the perception that this rise is brainwashing these people to think the majority is the separatism, although it's not. Why is this something important within this space? What we need to recognize is male society is evident. There's 50% critical mass in terms of population. They have power within media and politics and financial industry and academia and IT industry. Therefore, it is important to assess how we are able to cooperate with these male, how we are able to attain attain support and attain cooperation from these people. We analyze why separatism is hindering that and why on the opposition side, this is not going to, why we are able to flip that on the opposition side. Which means that we are able to achieve things like anti-discrimination law. We can achieve things like equalization of gender law. We are able to achieve more equalization of job opportunity.
You're right.
And that's the sort of thing, the values that we are able to actualize within this debate. Why is this debate winning? Firstly, all successfully explain how gender separatism can hinder the process by through things like echo chamber, but as closing government correctly points out, extent of echo chamber and extent of competitive was something questionable, but also they lack the mechanism to suggest why the unique idea or values and impacts that opening opposition stands for is actually going to have capacity and chance of succeeding within on the opposition side. And we told you the unique mechanism within outside of the house. Secondly, we decrease the harm of opening government because when we are able to prove that both gender school or both gender company is going to be better off in the long run, we are able to decrease the number of individuals in the long run. Lastly, I want to briefly engage with opening government. Firstly, when under their side, the perception is, oh, these people were only able to succeed because you are separated, because male was not there, which means that the rhetoric, you are not able to feel proud of yourself. You are likely to be demonized, and that's why you are not able to be happy. Secondly, you are internally, there's likely to, that's why we take, even if we assume that there's mental well-being, I'm not sure to what extent this separatism is the right method for these people to feel mentally secured. For these reasons, Platz oppose.
Hey, thank you for your wonderful remark.